2 years. That's how long the most powerful financial institution on the planet fought, in federal court, all the way to the doorstep of the Supreme Court, to stop the public from seeing a single stack of paper. It started with one reporter. In May of 2008, a Bloomberg journalist named Mark Pittman filed a simple request. Tell us who you're lending money to and how much. He wasn't asking for anything illegal. He was asking a government institution a question the public is legally entitled to ask. The Federal Reserve said no. So Bloomberg sued. The case dragged through a federal court, then an appeals court, then all the way toward the Supreme Court. While the 2008 financial crisis tore through the global economy in plain sight, Lehman Brothers had just collapsed. Unemployment was climbing toward the worst levels in a generation. Families were losing homes by the hundreds of thousands. And behind a wall of lawyers, the Fed and the banking industry were fighting hard to make sure nobody found out exactly how much money was quietly being pumped into the system to keep it standing. In March of 2011, the Supreme Court finally refused to even hear the case. The doors cracked open. 29,000 pages of documents hit the public record. And here's the number that came out of it. On its single worst day, December 5th, 2008, the Fed had $1.2 trillion out the door, at once, propping up banks all over the world. That's not even the number that caused the real outrage. That one's coming. Hold on to it. Because here's what almost nobody realizes when they hear that story. The Fed wasn't behaving strangely in 2008. It wasn't panicking or improvising a cover-up on the fly. It was doing exactly what it has always done, from the very first night it was ever conceived, over 100 years earlier, on a night that, officially, never happened. To understand how an unelected institution ended up with more day-to-day power over your paycheck than your own government, you have to go back to where this really started. Not in Washington, not in a courtroom. On a private island off the coast of Georgia, in the middle of the night, rewind to 1907. America didn't have a central bank. When a panic hit Wall Street that year and banks started collapsing like dominoes, there was no institution built to stop it. So one man stepped in with his own money and his own word, J.P. Morgan. He personally organized a rescue of the New York Stock Exchange, corralling the country's biggest bankers into a room and essentially ordering them to save the system because nobody else could. The panic itself had been ugly. Banks failed. Depositors panicked and pulled their cash out in waves, which is exactly the kind of behavior that drags healthy banks down along with the sick ones. And the whole crisis had just been resolved, essentially, by one aging financier deciding on his own authority who would survive and who wouldn't. It worked, but it terrified the people in power for a very simple reason. What happens the next time if Morgan says no? Or if Morgan isn't around? So a small group of the most connected men in the country decided to solve the problem quietly. In November of 1910, U.S. Senator Nelson Aldrich of Rhode Island sent word to a handful of men, not colleagues, not committee members, a hand-picked circle, Assistant Treasury Secretary A. Piet Andrew, Morgan's right-hand man Henry Davison, the president of the country's largest bank Frank Vanderlip, and one of Wall Street's sharpest banking minds, Paul Warburg. There was a reason it had to be quiet. According to the Federal Reserve's own official historians, Aldrich knew that the group's deep ties to Wall Street could arouse suspicion and sink the entire plan in Congress before it ever reached a vote. And he had good reason to worry. The country was already in the grip of a populist backlash against exactly the kind of concentrated financial power these 6 men represented. Within 2 years, a separate congressional investigation, the Pujo Committee, would haul J.P. Morgan himself in front of Congress to answer for how much of the nation's money and credit sat in the hands of one small circle of financiers. If voters had learned that the plan for a national bank had been quietly written by that same circle on a private island, it would have been dead before it ever reached the floor. They were told to travel separately, in secret, and meet at a train platform in New Jersey after dark. Once aboard Aldrich's private rail car, something strange happened. The men agreed to stop using their last names. For the entire trip, they called each other only Nelson, Harry, Frank, Paul, and Piet, so the porters and staff couldn't later identify exactly who had been on that train. For decades afterward, they privately called themselves the First Name Club. Their cover story was a duck hunting trip. One of them even carried a borrowed shotgun he had no intention of firing, just to sell the disguise. They rode south, boarded a private launch, and disappeared onto Jekyll Island, a club so exclusive that Munsey's magazine once called it the richest, the most exclusive, the most inaccessible retreat in the world. For 9 days, 6 of the most powerful men in American finance sat behind closed doors and wrote the blueprint for a national banking system. Then they went home, and they told no one, not Congress, not the president, not the public who would spend the next century living under whatever they had built. For 20 years, every man on that island denied the meeting had even taken place. It wasn't until the 1930s, when a rival politician tried to publicly take credit for their ideas, that the men finally admitted, in books and memoirs, what had actually happened on Jekyll Island. By then, it didn't matter. Their blueprint had already become law. On December 23, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, built, almost point for point, from a plan drafted in secret by 6 men on a hunting trip that never happened. So when the Fed spent 2 years, a century later, fighting in court to keep its 2008 numbers hidden, that wasn't some strange departure from its character. That was the institution acting exactly the way it was built to act on day one. Operate first, explain later. If it ever explains at all. Here's the part almost nobody gets taught in school. The men in that room didn't get everything they wanted. The public would never have accepted a central bank openly designed by Wall Street for Wall Street. So the plan was repackaged and pushed through Congress under new names. Representative Carter Glass, Senator Robert Owen, until it didn't look like a Wall Street project anymore. What emerged was something stranger than either side had wanted, a hybrid. 12 regional Federal Reserve banks, technically capitalized by stock that ordinary commercial banks are required to hold. Stock that can't be sold, can't be traded, can't be used as collateral, and pays a small fixed dividend, nothing close to the control or the upside a normal shareholder gets. And sitting above all 12, a genuine federal body, a board of governors in Washington, nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, public, private, both, neither. Built that way on purpose, so that no single side, not politicians, not bankers, could ever fully claim it, and neither side could ever fully kill it either. Then they insulated it even further. Governors serve 14-year terms, staggered so no single president can ever reshape the whole board at once. The Fed funds its own operations from its own income, which means Congress can't simply starve it of money the way it can with almost any other agency on Earth. And interest rates aren't even the whole toolkit. The Fed can create money outright, buying up trillions of dollars in bonds, using money that simply didn't exist the day before, a tool most people only heard the name of during the 2008 crisis and again during the pandemic years that followed, even though the power itself long predates both. Officially, the Fed's job is described in 2 words: a dual mandate, maximum employment, and stable prices. In practice, those 2 goals frequently pull in opposite directions, which means the small group of people balancing them are making a judgment call every few weeks about which part of the country absorbs the pain first. 8 times a year, that small committee, called the FOMC, meets behind closed doors and decides where interest rates go next. You've probably never seen a single one of their faces. You can probably name your mayor. Can you name a single person on that committee? As of this year, the person chairing that committee is Kevin Warsh, sworn in this past May, stepping into a job that, in this same year, has already been dragged into a fight over just how independent the Fed is even supposed to be, a fight that has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. That fight isn't some settled piece of history. It's happening right now. While you're watching this, that committee's decisions move faster and further into your daily life than almost any election you'll ever vote in. Here's why any of this should matter to you personally today. That interest rate decision, made by people you can't name in a room you'll never see, it sets the price of your mortgage. It decides whether your credit card balance grows faster than your paycheck. It decides whether your industry is quietly hiring or quietly cutting people next quarter. It decides whether the money sitting in your savings account is losing real value every month, even while the number on the screen stays exactly the same. If you're paying off a car loan, that rate was shaped by this. If you're trying to buy your first home and watching the mortgage rate move half a point in a matter of weeks, that was shaped by this. If your company quietly paused hiring last year for reasons nobody fully explained to you, there's a real chance this was upstream of that decision too. None of these moments came with a headline that said, "The Federal Reserve just changed your life." They just showed up quietly as a slightly smaller paycheck, a slightly scarier bill, a job offer that never came. You didn't do anything wrong. Nobody sat you down and taught you this on purpose or by accident. This isn't a personal finance failure. It's a structural one. A system engineered from its very first secret meeting to be powerful, technical, and just boring enough that almost no one would ever watch it closely. Why doesn't anyone teach you this? Ask yourself that. Actually sit with it for a second. Remember that number from the beginning? $1.2 trillion out the door in a single day in December of 2008. Here's the part that made even the loudest critics in Congress lose their minds. In 2010, under pressure from an almost unheard-of coalition, Bernie Sanders on the left, Ron Paul on the right, agreeing on almost nothing else, Congress forced the first full audit of the Federal Reserve in its nearly 100-year history. When the results landed in July of 2011, the headline number wasn't $1.2 trillion. It was $16 trillion. Broken down, the list reads like a who's who of global finance. Citigroup's total came to roughly $2.5 trillion. Morgan Stanley, just over $2 trillion. Merrill Lynch, close behind, Bank of America, more than $1.3 trillion. And that's before you even reach the foreign names on the list. Barclays, Deutsche Bank, UBS, Credit Suisse, the Royal Bank of Scotland. Because the Fed wasn't just quietly propping up American banks. It was propping up a global financial system that Americans had no vote in, and until this audit, no visibility into at all. Now, to be fair, because the full story matters more than the scariest headline, that $16 trillion figure counts the same money more than once. If a bank borrowed $1 billion overnight and rolled that loan over for 100 nights, this counting method logs it as $100 billion in assistance, even though it was really the same billion. Borrowed again and again. Serious economists, including some at Bloomberg itself, will tell you $1.2 trillion is the more honest number, and banks reaped an estimated $13 billion just from the below-market rates they were quietly given along the way. And the list of who got help didn't stop at banks. Buried in the data were household names that had nothing to do with Wall Street at all. General Electric, McDonald's, companies most people would never picture needing a financial rescue, quietly tapping emergency lending programs that most of their own customers never heard about. One of the more unsettling names in the data, a bank that was, at the time, 29% owned by the government of Libya under Muammar Gaddafi, which drew a combined $35 billion in Fed assistance during the crisis. At the exact same time, the United States held a tense, complicated relationship with that same regime. But here's what wasn't a rounding error and wasn't in dispute. The audit found that Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, was sitting on the board of the New York Fed at the exact same time his own bank received more than $390 billion in emergency assistance. It found that a top New York Fed official, William Dudley, was granted a personal waiver to keep his own investments in AIG and General Electric. At the same time, those companies were receiving public bailout money. It found that roughly 2/3 of the contracts the Fed awarded to manage the entire bailout were handed out with no competitive bidding at all, often to the very same firms benefiting from the money. Even the sitting Federal Reserve chairman publicly pushed back, calling some of the reporting egregious errors. Bloomberg published a point-by-point rebuttal defending its numbers. It got heated. It got personal. Because for the first time, the public was watching in real time a fight over just how much of this machine was ever meant to be seen at all. Now, to be fair to the other side of this, because you should hear it, the people who defend this level of secrecy aren't cartoon villains. Their argument is that if you publicly announce exactly which bank is borrowing emergency money to stay alive, you can trigger the very bank run you were trying to prevent. The announcement itself becomes the disaster. And the argument for keeping interest rate decisions insulated from politicians is that elected officials, facing re-election every 2 or 4 years, have every incentive to juice the economy right before a vote and let someone else deal with the inflation afterward. Independence, they argue, is a feature, not a bug. There's real research behind that argument, too. Comparisons across countries consistently find that economies with more independent central banks tend to average lower, more stable inflation over time than economies where politicians control the money supply directly. Maybe that's true. Maybe secrecy really is, sometimes, the price of stability. But maybe it's necessary, and you are never supposed to fully understand this, are two very different sentences. and only one of them was ever actually said to your face. So here's the real answer to the question in the title of this video. What is the Federal Reserve's best-kept secret? It's not $1.2 trillion. It's not $16 trillion. It isn't even Jekyll Island. The best-kept secret is that none of this was an accident. The complexity wasn't a side effect of building something important. The complexity was the design. 6 men on a hunting trip that never happened understood something in 1910 that still holds true today. If you make something powerful enough, technical enough, and boring enough, most people will simply stop watching. And the people who stop watching are the easiest people in the world to make decisions for, without ever having to ask. That's the whole trick. Not a hidden room, not a secret handshake. Silence, dressed up as complexity, protected by boredom. Even the name was part of the design. Federal, chosen to sound like an official arm of government, even though a meaningful part of the structure technically isn't. Reserve, a nod to the gold and silver reserves that stopped meaning what you'd assume back in 1971, when the dollar was cut loose from gold entirely. A name engineered, like everything else about this institution, to sound exactly official enough that nobody would feel the need to ask a second question. And once you can see that, you have a hard time unseeing it. Every headline that says, "The Fed held rates steady," or "The Fed signaled a possible cut," stops being background noise and starts being what it actually is. A small group of people making a decision that will move through your mortgage, your job, and your savings account within months. Whether you were paying attention or not. You don't need a finance degree to watch it happen. You just need to know it's worth watching in the first place, which by design was never supposed to occur to you. You just spent several minutes not being bored. That's not an accident either. That's the exact opposite of what this system was built to count on. If you want to actually understand how money really moves, and who's quietly deciding what your paycheck is worth while you're not looking, that's exactly what this channel exists to do. Subscribe, because the next video goes even deeper into what happened after 2008. And it gets stranger from here.